Hello and welcome to Independent Film Festival Boston. My name is Tess and I'm very excited to welcome you to our shorts package Exeter and our discussion that we'll be having today. Please help me in welcoming our filmmakers to the discussion. Thank you guys for joining us today. Just to get us started nice and easy, I think it would be great to kind of have each of you introduce yourselves and the films that you're associated with.
I'm Nick Jandl, and I'm with the Chase short film. I'm based in Los Angeles.
I'm Mike Doyle. Nick wrote the film. I directed it. He also stars in it and produced it, The Chase.
I'm Scott Burkhardt. I did a film called Girls Are Strong here that I wrote and directed, yeah.
Great. So when you guys were getting started on these projects, kind of where did these ideas begin and kind of come from as you were starting the writing process? And then how did you kind of each get further involved then in the projects?
Well, mine's based on a true story. Something that happened to me and my wife a few years ago in Los Angeles, right on Melrose Avenue where we filmed it. And it was this insane adventure that took place over multiple blocks of Los Angeles. And Mike's been a dear friend. Mike actually introduced me to my wife, and he was a natural choice for who I wanted to direct this thing. And Mike, you can tell more about.
Yeah, Nick had this really interesting story that happened to him, and I think our job was to take that story and make it a film. So I always had this idea that it was a road trip on foot where these two people from very different backgrounds go on this journey. And at the end of it, they're both changed by having met one another. And so, a lot of my job was sort of just like, adding some ingredients, taking some out, because like the bones of the story were pretty great. And it was the first time I directed something that I hadn't written. So that was also like a really fun challenge. But Nick is, incredible collaborator, great writer and good friend. So it was a really, I was going to say, before I said it was a lovely process, it wasn't. It was impossible. It was so hard. Like, we were shooting nights and it was like the coldest it had been in LA. We had these like sort of corrupt cops that were supposed to be there that ended up coming up for some payola, like all the, the typical indie film travails that happen that, it's like, oh my God, it's a miracle that we made this thing. That said,
lead actor dropped out the night before.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
So, but we had a nice foundation between the two of us. So that part was a real joy, and the whole thing, despite its many ups and downs, was really a pleasure to make.
So, Nick, were you not originally cast then, or was the other actor?
Right. Yes, the other my nemesis.
Okay.
Yeah. It worked out incredibly well. We're just so grateful to be part of such a caring entertainment community out here where people have each other's backs, and sure enough, it was remedied really, really fast, and we had an unbelievable actor come in and agree to do 2 back-to-back night shoots. Like, hey, how do you want to spend your Saturday and Sunday night from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m.? How about you come do this short film starting in 8 hours?
And it's one of those things I'm sure you've all experienced, and people watching have experienced if they've made films. We couldn't. I can't imagine the film without him. Yeah. And like they say you make the film that you're meant to make, and that felt like what seemed like a real sort of game stopper was really the springboard into what made the film really great.
We're speaking about Brandon Fobbs, who's just the sweetest guy and a phenomenal talent.
He was great. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Did he know how much running he would have to do when he agreed to the night shoots?
This one wrote it. He didn't even know how much running. He's like, we have to do it again. I was like, you didn't make a movie called The Sit. It's called The Chase. Yes, you got to do it again. They came on board.
My God, just long takes. Mike loves these long takes where he really wants to just let things play. But when it's, block after block after block, I can't even hear him yell cut. So Yeah, we joke the next film we're going to do together is going to be called The Chair, and it'll just be like interior, one room, a warm fireplace, glasses of wine. That's it.
Amazing, yeah. For me, I guess let's see. I wrote a feature script that was actually about the mother-daughter characters in the film, and I've been trying to get that made for a long time, and it hasn't happened yet. So I was interested in sort of doing a short that was in some way related to the feature, and the Saeed character who's the lead in the short. Is a character in the feature version, not the protagonist in the feature, but so I decided to kind of just take that character and explore a little bit of what I thought might be his story, and so that's sort of how it came about. And I guess the script, I wrote the short, and the short won a couple short screenplay awards, and one of them came with a production grant. So then I was like, oh, okay, well, if you're going to give me a little money, maybe I'll actually go make it. So that's how sort of that came about, at least the beginnings of it. Yeah.
Hey, Scott, has the short now changed the way you look at your feature, or has it changed? Have you rewritten the feature as a result, or?
I haven't too much. I haven't really rewritten it as a result, but I have definitely been contemplating aspects of it, certainly because of the short, in terms of what do I want to do, and what's the most interesting. It's sort of like you have these. I feel like you have these characters and you have this world, and in some way the short has opened up, maybe a more interesting aspect of what could be in the world, and how I could sort of incorporate some of these other characters in a more prominent way, maybe. So yeah, it's I'm sort of trying. Hashing through some of that actually right now. So
how long was your shoot for the short?
3 days.
Times that by 6 and you have a feature.
Right. No, exactly. Easy peasy. What was interesting, the little bit of grant money we got was from the Sun Valley Film Festival, and part of the stipulation was we had to shoot in Boise, or I had to shoot in Idaho. So we ended up shooting in Idaho, which I've never been to. I've been to but prior to this, I'd only not been to Idaho, Montana, and the Dakotas. And I was like, all right, well, we're going to go to Idaho and make this movie. So, and it was, it was great. We did cast people out of New York and LA, with the one exception of the daughter who we cast out of Boise, who turned out to be kind of shockingly good, I thought. So
yeah.
I was very pleased with that. But yeah, it was 3 days, 2 night, you guys had longer night shoots, but we had 2 solid night shoots. In 1 day, which is always a scheduling pain. So yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, it was good.
Were the themes that you were exploring kind of in this exploration of kind of female identity and perceived identity and how that kind of works with moving in the world? Is that also a major theme for the feature, or is that something you explored more for the short? I would say that is the theme for the feature, pretty much. So yeah, no, I think that theme is very much there, because the feature is really about the mother-daughter, and the mother and the daughter characters, and that's a lot of it. Yeah, but in the course of kind of their journey, they encounter a lot of sort of new Americans, and generally those people tend to treat them pretty well. Whereas some other people don't. So I was kind of interested in exploring aspects of that. And so really the Saeed character kind of came out of okay, he was kind to them where other people weren't. And where does that kindness come from, in a way? I was sort of where would that come from? And sort of I developed that sort of story from there, I guess. But certainly that's a big part of the feature too. Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah.
So how did you both, for both films, how did you go about kind of casting and finding all of the individuals? We obviously know for the lead for one in The Chase, found last minute, but kind of how did you approach the rest of the casting process and getting everybody involved?
Well, Nick wrote it, and he had always envisioned himself as himself. And our good friend Chaley Rose, who plays his wife, Strangely, she's also a good friend of theirs, and Chaley and Nick's wife could be mistaken for sisters, probably. Yeah. And then Kevin Daniels was a classmate of mine in drama school. Ken Kirby, we found.
He's a friend of mine I'd worked with previously on a web series through mutual friends.
Yeah. And so it was mostly, we didn't really have a traditional casting process of reading people. We just sort of relied on friends whose work we knew. And I mean, that's the most refreshing thing of, this is the third short, and I wrote and directed a feature. In the indie world, there's just such I guess my corollary before was the theater world. Like when you're doing a play on your Monday, you do a reading of someone else's play. And it feels like with indies, everybody will work on something if they're available. Like there's a really great groundswell of support, and it's just really refreshing how people support each other's work.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. The casting process for me was similar in some ways. I mean, the mother character, I knew her from New York City and being an actress here, Amelia McLean. And then, like I said, the daughter we cast out of Boise, and she was amazing. And then Mick Watford, who played Darren, who's sort of the heavy in the film, the bad guy. He's married to a friend of mine in Los Angeles, and he's an actor there. And the tricky part was really casting Saeed, in that I wanted somebody. I don't speak Arabic. I needed somebody who spoke fluent Arabic, and also I wanted someone who is from sort of the Levantan Arab world, meaning like Palestine, Syria, that kind of sort of Jordan, that sort of area specifically. And so I really had a lot of trouble, honestly, finding anyone. So I started going through MFA program like showcases, like on their websites where they put up the latest graduating class. And I dug through a bunch of these programs, and I finally found Adrian in like a showcase for maybe the 2018 University of Washington MFA graduating class. Yeah. And he looked the part, and I was like, oh, wow. And, so I reached out to him. I just emailed him and said, hey, would you mind reading this and possibly auditioning for this? And he was like, oh, okay. And he did. And, he was great. And then the other key element was his wife, Rasha. And I found, that was just the backstage, and I found Katya. And Katya was actually super helpful in terms of the translation, because Arabic and English don't translate terribly well. So what I had written in the page in English, was not, to translate that directly would be, wouldn't make any sense. So she was instrumental, and she has a co-writing credit on the film, because she really helped translate what I'd written in the spirit of what I wanted. It's translating that to Arabic. And Adrian, he grew up in the U.S. He was born in the U.S., but his grandparents spent some time in a Palestinian refugee camp in Syria. So they had sort of Syrian accents when he was growing up. So he kind of knew what a Syrian accent was and how it sounded, and was able to kind of give it that authenticity, which was, hugely important and very independent from me. And, they were true collaborators in the sense of like really helping sort of work that out. So they contributed a lot of the, the cultural specificity that I couldn't really. So that was great.
They had such a beautiful dynamic. I mean, like having a video chat scene in any movie, it's just hard to pull off. And it was just, it felt so full and rich, full of love. And I just thought you guys really nailed it. Like drowning in Zooms and video chats, like it felt great. Yeah.
Right. No, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it was, I think, you're always looking at your work and like, and I still hesitate with opening a movie with a Zoom chat. like that. I still am like, is that really a dynamic opening? But I think it worked out ultimately. But yeah, I feel good about it. And she was great. We recorded that sort of independently of really the production, and then Adrian sort of responding to that via the laptop, because she was actually never on set. So that was sort of an independent, its own little shoot. But yeah, I appreciate that. It was tricky, but I think it worked out pretty well.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So both of the films explore kind of senses of identity by either perceived or kind of realized. How did you both kind of, and this may be more for the chase because I know, Scott, we've already talked about this a little bit with your film, but like, how did you guys kind of pursue addressing kind of Blackness and police and kind of approaching that conversation that you touch on within your film?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was,
that was really the
core.
The core, yeah. And we shot this in the fall of 2000, was right after I did 2018. Yeah. So it was sort of before there was, this groundswell of awareness. But, despite that, Nick is in a relationship with a Black woman, and he has a mixed race child. And so he is, very much in that world. But we also, we wanted to, I think, my goal, and whether or not I succeeded, was I wanted to create a dimensional character, and what seems at first glance, or who he seems at first glance, this guy who takes a phone, we wanted to round him out, and also also give the dimensionality to Nick's character as well, that I think with that sort of binary of who these two people are, we could have gone down some well-trod tropes that we don't want to anymore. And
yeah, and it was so interesting. I mean, Mike said a lot of it, but I mean, just, yes, we hadn't had the big summer of Black Lives Matter protests, but there still had been this rising momentum, and so in real life, the way this happened was essentially like the film. And the first kind of funny moment was that my wife did indeed beat me to she got up and ran before I even had registered what had happened.
She's from
That's a great moment. That's a great moment. Yeah.
And wearing Birkenstocks, flew down an alleyway, this dark alleyway at 11 o'clock. And I had this shell shock moment where I was frozen, and my friend had to tell me to go, just like in the movie. And so first it was a bit emasculating, but after that it was this really fascinating thing to be this, whitey white man chasing a Black man having a mixed race wife, and all of the potential ramifications of chasing down someone who had stolen a cell phone, which, an expensive item, but is it really worth creating this? All these questions going through my head. Is it worth creating this potentially really horrible scenario by continuing this chase?
And I think the line that Nick wrote, that Chaley says when he says, "I'll be fine," and she's like, "I'm not just worrying about you." Right. That I think there was something that was sort of the fulcrum of the story, because that, we live in a world that that is not necessarily safe for a lot of people, and we take a lot of, I think, that line sort of resonates because it takes for granted a lot of assumptions about, justice and a lot of things. So yeah, no, it resonates. I think that line really resonates. Yeah, I mean, it was so great at the end where it was just I had this feeling of just these guys could be friends, if there's this weird scenario between them, though. What do you do? Yeah, that's the flip the film obviously has, because I think we were, we wanted to bring them together in a more sort of concrete cinematic way, which wasn't part of the true story. That's where we extrapolated, but it's I think I'm I'm always a, perennial optimist. And I did see it, not only as a road movie, but then a buddy movie.
Right.
Play at each sort of.
And in speaking with my wife about the experience too, because she, she was interviewed by the cops when they showed up, and she described that moment of having to tell them that, yes, the person who stole her phone was Black, and just, how she just felt this like weird conflicting emotion inside, even just saying that to cops, so there's just so much loaded into it all. We tried to capture as much as we could in the short.
Yeah, you did a really beautiful job of kind of conveying that, but also bringing, I think, to Mike's point, a little bit of levity into it as well, like the interaction that she was having with police. And then I did really love the end beat of the other person snagging the phone and them running together, having bonded over this now extra layer. It was really phenomenal to see.
That was long run. That was the longest running take.
Because I was like, you got credits. You got to keep going.
Was that beat always in the script, Nick, or was it something that came to you at a certain point, or was it yeah?
That was probably version 3 or 4. Okay. We toyed with a couple endings, all with different messages, different moments.
We pared down that ending because it was a little more sort of like there was another character that came in and sort of it just got a little. It just needed sort of like a clean. I mean, it's a bit of absurdity, but it just needed sort of that clean, moment to happen to launch us into.
And I think, remembering that levity, and I still have trouble just, figuring out if I want to describe this as a comedy or a drama or a dramedy. But I thought that moment for me kind of wrapped it up perfectly. And we wanted to make a short, not a long. So we had to.
But a short, not a medium. We, also like whenever Nick told me the story, there were elements that, now that everyone was safe and everyone, was okay afterwards, that I was like, I can't believe that happened. Like the thing with the Birkenstocks, and she was at one point you were going barefoot, and like there were a lot of elements that I thought like lent itself to humor. And I always sort of see the glasses half full, and like love sort of like the retelling of sometimes like the most awful things in the retelling. There's some levity and fun and comedy. So
yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. So I know we're kind of nearing the end of our time. I'm sure you're all working on some very exciting things. Are there some other, like, what else is kind of coming up next for each of you? And I know these films were waiting to be screened this year, so I'm sure some other things have queued up.
Go ahead, Scott.
I'm doing shooting a web series this summer that I'm directing that somebody else wrote, which is a newish experience for me, like Mike was doing on The Chase. And then I have another short that I may shoot this summer. It depends on how much I pull it all together. We'll see. So yeah.
I'm recurring on a Netflix show coming up called On the Verge with Julie Delpy and Giovanni Ribisi. I'm not sure when it's coming out, but a few episodes of that, and then developing and producing as well. Mike and I are working on a project together. What about you?
Yeah, I had a feature that came out last year called Almost Love that I wrote and directed. It's on Netflix now. And this project that Nick and I are working on, we optioned a story from NPR, and it looks like it'll be hopefully a multi-season series that takes place in El Salvador. So yeah.
Very cool. That's fantastic.
Can I ask a quick question before we're done?
Please.
Scott, the experience of directing your own work.
Yeah.
Like, was that the first time, or?
That was the second time I've done it. Yeah, I did a short in grad school called The Assassinant, which is about a guy who's an assassin's assistant and wants to be an assassin. That was with, you might know, Greg Keller.
Yeah.
He was the lead in that. And that was, I think for me, it's at least distancing yourself from the right, like it just kind of cutting off the writing at some point in a way where you're like, okay, what's going to be the best sort of, filmed version of this, and sort of having to make some decisions sometimes that are tough, I guess, is the tricky part. I don't feel like I've totally mastered that like switch yet. I still feel like my stuff is I'm a writer first still, really. Like I so it's directing something that I think I'm getting better at, but I still feel I'm a little more writing forward in my work than directing.
It changes from the page to the stage to the edit. Like, each time it sort of becomes its own thing, which is at the same time terrifying and also liberating, my experience has been,
Totally, yeah.
I was so afraid Mike was just going to ruin everything that I've written.
I'll try.
Yeah, well, there's just like you're saying. Yeah, there's the movie. What do they say? Yeah, what's the old adage? It's the movie. There's the movie you write, the movie you shoot, and the movie you edit, and those could be completely different films.
Yep.
Yeah. Were there? I realized we were going to wind down, but were there scenes that you guys ended up cutting that you were either like really excited about to begin with, or kind of sad to see lose in the end?
There was one scene in the original script that Mike basically said, "No one's going to believe this," and it was one of the real things that happened, which was instead of the Eddie, the guy who stole the phone, on the other side of the street, walking a distance away from us when we first see him again, he in real life had walked up the sidewalk between me and my wife, trying to pretend like we wouldn't recognize him, like nothing had ever happened. He was like sweating bullets, and he went right between us as we were catching our breath and trying to figure out what shadows he had disappeared into. And we decided to change that just for multiple reasons, but one being it just might be too unbelievable that he would.
Yeah, it made more sense in the telling of the story. It also, like, within the constraints that we had, we didn't have background, we didn't have control over crowds. I mean, we had permits and everything, but it would be, there was a way to pull it off. But I thought with the constraints that we had, we were risking very seriously tipping into like a moment of like, and I think it's just important, especially with a story like this, that you limit the amount of times that you have where the audience is like, wait, what? Like they have to stay engaged because the train's moving. Yeah. And so I sort of made a decision to, restage that, but, and we haven't spoken since. The first time.
I mean, that's wild that that's actually what happened, and that I absolutely, if we hadn't spoken and you had that in the scene, I would be like, no way.
Yeah, exactly.
It made no sense. A lot of that night didn't make any sense.
Fair.
I guess for me, I'm trying to think if we cut any, well, okay, let's see. The ending as it is right now in the film is a little more surreal than the way it was shot. So I sort of did some stuff in the editing to kind of massage that and change that from what sort of is actually in the script. And I did forget to mention this. This is kind of the opposite. The first scene, the Zoom call, is actually did not exist in the script, and is cobbled together from a small reshoot and some footage from the other Zoom scenes. So it was like I was trying to decide how much information we wanted to know about who Saeed is before we got into this particular story. And I'd gotten some feedback that was sort of like, we should kind of know a little bit more maybe about him before we go into the story. And so I decided to sort of do a small reshoot, actually in Los Angeles for like a day, and then and use some footage from one of the other Zoom scenes to kind of hopefully make that work. Yeah. So that was a little bit that was sort of an additional scene actually that didn't exist.
That's awesome. It is a really powerful opening. And I think particularly in a year of people doing a lot of these things, there's a connection that I think people really identify with in that experience of trying to find a shared experience with someone who's far away.
Yeah, and isolation for sure.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, guys, thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation. We appreciate it so much. And for those of you watching, please continue to enjoy the festival and enjoying the films, and we'll see you all soon.
Thanks, Tess.
Bye. Thanks, Tess.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank